Welcome everyone to What the Force, and welcome to a new episode of Once Upon a Time in the Outer Rim, where we are covering The Mandalorian Season 1, and this is for Episode 8, Redemption. Wow. With me to discuss The Mandalorian, as always, is Alex Kane. Welcome back.
Hey, what's up, everybody?
You're going to miss me when this is all done.
Yeah, we've reached the end already. Thank God there's another season coming.
Yeah, we just got the announcement too that the season 2 will premiere in fall 2020. So we have a mere, three quarters to wait of a year. This has been a wild ride. And, just as a reminder, we cover The Mandalorian from a connotative, genre-specific fairy tale and mythic lens. We might go into a little bit about the overall season this episode, just because we're now at the end, and a little bit to what we think kind of might be in the cards for the universe and the galaxy far, far away. Just as a reminder, please remember to subscribe, like on YouTube or your pod app of choice. You can leave a review. It helps other people find the show, and it's a great way to keep up to date with all of the What the Force content. So overall, this season, 8 episodes long, is very highly rated. And from a consumption perspective, they kind of track these things from comparing to other streaming shows. And it's not as easy to understand kind of how many people are actually watching these streaming shows, because, Netflix and now Disney Plus and all of these streaming services tend to keep their cards a little bit tighter to their chests about what does the actual viewership look like. We do know that as of December 1, The Mandalorian was 39% more likely to be watched than any other streaming show. That's very, very high. It's actually higher than even The Queen or Stranger Things or even Game of Thrones. That's significant considering how popular Game of Thrones and Stranger Things Season 3 were. It had a 9 out of 10 on IMDb. And I think you said it was like 95% fresh on Rotten Tomatoes.
Yeah, maybe 94.
94?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's done very well from an appeal perspective. I would say it appeals to not only adults, but also children. My 8-year-old loved it, is looking forward to dressing up as the Mandalorian and having a baby Yoda in a little baby Bjorn. So it appeals to a lot of people, women, men, the whole family can sit down and watch it. And that means that more people are going to watch it. What did you think of kind of the overall season from, what we got? They did spend a lot of money, and they really invested in this show out of the gate, which was really nice to see.
It looked so good. I mean, it felt like that sort of used universe, the sort of kit-bashed aesthetic that Lucas and his collaborators were going for in the late 70s.
Yeah, and analog, it felt Star Wars-y. I would say that also they made advances in digital technology, where I read an article, Kathleen Kennedy, talking about how they can now send a crew of 2 to go and film locations around the world, real locations. And because they have this now live projection technology, they can, and they started to use it for Solo, but now they can basically create full landscapes behind the characters. So they're on a soundstage in LA or, wherever they happen to be filming the episode, and it looks like they're in a snowy landscape. And then there's less digital editing that has to happen in the end.
Yeah, and I think that, if there was a complaint about the show, is that sort of in the middle or 3/4 of the way through, it started to kind of go off in various little character directions, right? And kind of
there's almost like vignettes.
Yeah. Almost like an anthology rather than an episodic, novelistic story. And in the end, it came right back around to where episodes 2 and 3 were headed, right? With the guild, the covert, the armor, and so Yeah, it feels like a beginning, a middle, and an end. It worked out for me.
Well, it's really interesting because to me, where you're talking about like specifically chapter 4, the sanctuary, where he ends up on the greenest planet we've seen, and then the gunslinger, he ends up on Tatooine, which is like mythologically significant to Star Wars. So it ended up being just really interesting to see kind of those are the, I don't know, reminders of what things are important, I suppose, from a mythological perspective. You know, protecting a home, a green planet, and then we got Tatooine, which is, again, mythologically significant.
Yeah, it's like that Campbellian duality, right? Like life and death, and kind of like thriving and creating life versus like scraping by and scavenging and you know, you can live like a Palpatine in a palace, or you can live like a Jawa, you know.
Yes.
It's all Star Wars. So
it's all Star Wars, yeah. And then we end where we begin in this last episode. Did you want to go into Redemption's recap?
Yeah. All right. So this is adapted from my recap for usatoday.com. Picking up from last week's episode, our band of heroes, Mando, Cara Dune, and Greef Karga, are still pinned down inside a not-so-safe house while Moff Gideon... Mando, Cara Dune, and Greef Karga are still pinned down inside a not-so-safe house while Moff Gideon, a ruthless Imperial enforcer, surrounds them with a company of stormtroopers. As Gideon's forces assemble a heavy repeater cannon, the Moff tries to lure the bounty hunters into the open by pressing their buttons. He knows more about their pasts, we soon learn, than even the audience does. Cara, for example, is from the planet Alderaan, famously destroyed by the Death Star. The Mandalorian's birth name is also confirmed to be Din Djarin. Unfortunately, Queel, the fan favorite alien voiced by Nick Nolte, has been terminated. But IG-11, the droid he reprogrammed to protect Baby Yoda, arrives on a speeder bike to save the day, Baby Yoda riding along in front of him like a shot out of E.T. Things heat up when a flame trooper unit douses the safe house in fire, and Baby Yoda uses the Force to save the mercs from a hellish end, hurling the flames back at the imp. Mando suffers a grave injury during the showdown and tells Cara and the others to leave him. And so the droid Djarin's been so distrustful of all this time becomes his savior. IG-11 removes Mando's helmet, sprays him with Bacta, and carries Din into the sewers below while the Mandalorian recovers from his wounds. Down in the metaphorical underworld below, the covert where the Mandalorians had lived in secrecy is found abandoned, a tomb now. Countless helmets are piled outside the forge, their owners having been slain by the Imperial remnant. Only the armorer remains. She refuses to abandon the precious metal left behind by the fallen. This is the way. Before Mando and his allies leave and make their way to freedom, the armorer rewards Din with the signet he'd felt unworthy of earlier in the season. She tells him it's his duty now to find Baby Yoda's people, legendary sorcerers known as the Jedi, and ensure the child is delivered safely to them. In the meantime, she says, you are a clan of 2. Our heroes take a ferry across a river of lava, headed straight for a squad of stormtroopers who will stop at nothing to acquire Baby Yoda. IG-11 makes a calculated decision. He will self-destruct at the end of the tunnel, sacrificing himself to save the rest. Djarin, who once hated every droid he encountered, begs the IG unit to reconsider in what is probably the show's most moving scene to date. Please tell me the child will be safe in your care, the machine says. Outside in the light of day, one obstacle remains in their path, Gideon and his TIE fighter. Mando equips a jetpack and takes flight, hooking himself onto the fighter in midair. After wrestling with the Moff's craft and holding on for dear life, Din slaps a couple grenades on the fighter's wing. It loses control and crashes. Mando still has a mission to carry out off-world, but Greef and Cara agree to stay behind and rebuild on Navarro, starting a new bounty hunter outpost. While Djarin gives Queel, who gave his life for the Mandalorian and Baby Yoda, a respectful burial, Gideon emerges from his smoking tie. The Moff surveys the ashen landscape with a glowing black blade in his hand, the ancient dark saber, one of Mandalorian culture's most treasured artifacts.
Yeah, what a thing to leave off on. Literally opens up like all of these questions about what is going on, what is the galaxy telling us, what does this all mean? Just utterly crazy. Yeah. So, what are your general thoughts of this last episode?
It's good. I mean, I don't know if it's. I mean, in some ways, you know, I thought YTD directing the final episode was an odd choice. You know, his style is so distinct and colorful, and kind of like. I didn't know how well it would mesh with everybody else's style, and I was completely wrong. I mean, it felt like the most natural thing in the world to kind of go from that sort of Troops pastiche in the beginning, and then sort of move on to all the Shakespearean. You know, he does it like perfectly well, and
he basically monologues like in the most colorful and fabulous way. Moff Gideon. I do want to spend a little, like a moment. You mentioned Troops, and this was a fan film in the 1990s that I remember seeing, and it was just massively amazing. Troops. It was a mock on cops, basically covering the events on Tatooine in A New Hope from basically the stormtroopers' perspective, as they basically are trying to investigate and find Luke Skywalker. And like it goes into kind of like the domestic situations, they're dealing with Jawas, and it kind of explains the events that happen on Tatooine through these troops' eyes. And at the beginning of the episode, we have the conversation between the two comedians that ended up playing the troops themselves. Let me just look them up. Sorry.
Jason Sudeikis and Adam Pally.
Yeah, they're SNL alumni. I think they were just doing like the voices of them. I don't think that they were actually like in the armor, but the people that did the armor was very natural. Like they're slumping on their bikes, they're waiting for the moments, and it felt like very much an homage to Troops. It also had a lot of feel of Red versus Blue from like Rooster Teeth, where they have the Halo, basically Master Chief animated, and they are dealing with like this weird world that's internal to this like world that they've created based on like what they have available in like Halo multiplayer. And then they animated it using screen capture and then voice overed it. It has that feel to it. Like, you know, what kind of exaggeration can you get out of the armor when you can't see the person's face? And like, generally speaking, I loved everything that they said, like, which was very human. Like, you kind of almost imagine them like anyone in this kind of situation would have this conversation. Like, these Moffs, they come into town, they want to make, you know, a big splash to show and see who's in charge. Like, how they talk was just so perfect. What did you think of that, like, homage?
I mean, I liked I'm a fan of Troops. I'm a fan of Red versus Blue. You know, like going back to, I like Star Wars spoofs. I like Halo. So yeah, when you said Red versus Blue, I was like, that totally makes sense. It's very Troops like. I liked the little banter about, let me see it. I want to see it. Meaning Baby Yoda.
Yeah.
Well, you got to see it. No, I'm not taking it out of the bag. You don't get to see it. And like anytime Baby Yoda is like squirms and tries to like escape, one of them, I think,
whacks it on the head.
Whacks it on the head like several times. Yes, that's kind of like. You know, it elicits like a visceral response in you. You're like, you know, don't harm the child. But yeah, they feel kind of just like ordinary people, as opposed to sort of when you see a stormtrooper or a death trooper or something in Star Wars, usually they're very, you know, they're kind of the typical like cold, calculating fascist with a blaster. But in Return of the Jedi, when you see the scout troopers, they are kind of goofy and slapsticky because of the way Han Solo, like, you know, taps one on the shoulder and runs away, and it's like, hey, what are you doing? You know, it feels like it's riffing on that.
Jedi Fallen Order, like, recently humanized all of the troopers that you like come up against. Like, when you sneak up to them, they're talking about like everyday stuff, like, oh, did you call your wife? Like, or, oh, my back hurts. Oh, my knees hurt. Like, just like very like humanistic things.
Yeah, in A New Hope,
really
when Obi-Wan's like sneaking around the Death Star, there's two stormtroopers like guarding the generators, and they're talking about like a new model of speeder, like a car, like talking about cars.
It's very George.
yeah, exactly.
And I think that's purposeful, is to try to humanize like these people who are part of the industrial machine, as much as we don't like them because they're kind of like brutal to the child. Like, it also shows like you could have like removed their helmets and put them on in anywhere in like the world, and you might see people like that having those sorts of conversations just about their jobs and the bureaucracy associated with like being a cog in a wheel. Cog in a machine.
Yeah, I mean, stories like Battlefront 2 and of course, like really with Finn and The Force Awakens, this new era of Star Wars has kind of said like, what happens when you take off a Stormtrooper's helmet and like really get to know this person? Like, like you can have the duality of like man and machine in a single individual, and it's like a sort of a fluid thing that can change for the better. And that's, I don't know, I find that inspiring. I think that they do a good job with that in kind of, like just showing that. Lost my train of thought.
It's okay. They do a good job of showing that, yes. I do want to talk a little bit about something I did notice over the course of the season, but especially this episode with the addition of Moff Gideon. We get like almost this non-contemporary, almost open verse, poetic sounding speech. It's like we get it from Quill, and we get it from Griff Karga, and a little bit from the Mandalorian, the armorer, Moff Gideon. And I wanted to actually like say one of the lines that he says, which is, I urge disgraced magistrate Griff Karga to search the wisdom of his years and urge you to lay down your arms and come outside. And it's like, it's almost like lyrical in sounding without rhyming. And I've noticed it. And like Griff also speaks kind of with a non-contemporary cadence and sentence structure. And Quill himself doesn't speak in a contemporary way, which to me is very, like not oppositional, but like very different from any Star Wars we've experienced thus far. The speech patterns of the characters within The Mandalorian are very unique. It almost makes it feel more fairy tale like. Mm-hmm. And in some ways almost like maybe Victorian or just non-contemporary is the best I can put it. But it to me, I felt like it sounded Shakespearean without the iambic pentameter rhyming rules.
Yeah, I mean, even like Alice in Wonderland or The Hobbit, you still get that kind of like, Victorian, that feel, that poetic, yeah. I mean, Yoda, like, look at Yoda, nobody talks like Yoda, and therefore he's one of the most iconic, memorable, weird, non-human characters in all of pop culture. Like, everybody kind of can do a sort of Yoda impression just because it is so utterly, unique and recognizable. Mm-hmm. And I think that Quill kind of, they're trying to do that maybe with him. I Have Spoken is like a meme, Yeah. Yeah. I think it works.
Like we didn't get that with IG-11. Like, to be fair, it's just something that has like resonated with me, and I don't know exactly why it's happening, because I don't know that I've seen, this is the first time I think I've seen it in Star Wars. Griff Karga specifically kind of talks like someone out of Deadwood. It's almost like a rougher version, but Moff Gideon himself has this very open verse cadence to his voice. And, rewatched the episode everything that Griff Karga says, which is basically, if you don't listen to me, I'm going to destroy you. And by the way, I know all of your deepest and darkest secrets. I know you better than you know yourselves. And everything he says, although horrifying, is actually so beautiful to listen to from a almost lyrical sounding monologue of destruction.
Yeah. I mean, Lucas comes from that sort of pulpy 1960s TV aesthetic, right? Like Star Trek and Westerns and the sort of serials that he based like Indiana Jones off of and stuff. So, you know, I think of like Phantom Menace even, and just sort of like the little, you know, negotiations, we've lost all communications, like that little human being is out of his mind, they're side by side, like things are lyrical in when George is like sort of writing, and you know, in time the suffering of your people will persuade you to see our point of view, like that kind of like, you know, flowery,
like the structure in which you are trapped will be raised in short order. Like there's just this like cadence to it, and I can't put my finger on it yet, and it's probably going to bug me for the next couple of months, and then I will just have to pull Alex back until I figure it out when I rewatch it or whatever what it means. But I would say think about that, because like in the original trilogy, except for Yoda, we didn't get a very non-contemporary speech pattern. Even in the prequels, the Jedi got a little bit more of that. Like how they spoke to each other was very, I don't know, with importance. So you got more of that. But like Padme, Anakin, you know, even Obi-Wan, not so much. And in the sequel trilogy, I don't think that we've gotten any of that. So to me, it's incredibly rare, and it gives the feeling of almost, I don't know how to say this, but like biblical significance. This is important, these words that are being said, and you should pay attention to them, maybe. We've talked about how everything that Quill says is important. And everything he did say was important. That's very true. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I just think that, you know, shows like, even though children and young people, you know, sort of grew up on the Clone Wars and Rebels, you know, I mean, those shows have so much texture and so many characters and like so many layers of events going on in so many places at once. You know, Mandalorian it's a very accessible, quiet, simple, you know, I attended a writing workshop once, and the Elizabeth Hand, this great novelist, she told us, you know, how do I plot a novel? I keep it simple, stupid. You know, like that's what, you know, The Mandalorian from a plot perspective, that's what it is. It's, you know,
it's not hard to follow what happens.
Yeah.
There is complexity in the decisions that are made, because sometimes he doesn't always do point A to point B. Sometimes he decides to go and like, you know, seek allies before he goes and does the final confrontation. But it doesn't feel like a direct quest retrieval show, even though the plotting is simple.
Yeah. Yeah, it just means sort of like, you know, it's not about, you know, a trade blockade. It's not about this like massive, you know, these space battles. It's not about, you know, it's not about, you know, clones or like all this like, you know, big.
There isn't a ton of exposition required for this show.
Yeah, you know, it's like I went to the cave and I fought the monster and I brought back the, you know, whatever. I got a Camptono of Beskar and, you know, make me a piece of shoulder armor. And, you know, I mean, this is like truly like anybody could be like, okay, you know, with The Mandalorian, I can be a Star Wars fan and not be lost in this massive universe of, you know, 42 years worth of lore. And but yet it's all there, though. It is all there for people like us who have kind of, you know, been following it for years. But
no, that's really interesting, because a long time ago in the course of the show, I mentioned I had a concern that Star Wars would become inaccessible to people because it required almost encyclopedia levels of knowledge to be able to follow the plot. Or, like, how do you get kids who, it's very hard to jump into Star Wars as a kid and be like, there's all of this universe building out there. And then like, where do you start from there? And to me, like, there's lots of different ways you can enter into Star Wars, and there is no one right way. And your Star Wars could be, I really like this novel, or I really like the video games, or I really like the cartoons, or I really like the television shows. And for the first out of the gate, this one did a very good job. Like, to your point, it requires no knowledge. It gives you all of what you need in show, and then gives you other threads if you're like kind of interested in the down season of following up and seeing more.
Yeah.
Like, people were tweeting out today, like the season ended and it was opening up like Empire Strikes Back on Disney Plus as like the next recommended thing, when it could have easily redirected to Clone Wars or Rebels, which both have deep Mandalorian, experiential things. And especially Clone Wars, because Clone Wars asks the question of almost like the antithesis of what we're hearing about in this almost synthesis. What is Mandalorian culture like if it is peaceful instead, Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a lot to think about with this show, and I'm probably going to be stewing on it for a while.
Yeah. Kelly Knox on Twitter pointed out that the sigil or the signet on the Mandos that find him in his youth, right, Din Djarin, when he was a kid, they have the symbol of Clan Vizsla on their armor, and Vizsla is the clan that we see in the Clone Wars, especially, and Favreau, voiced a Vizsla character twice now, and that's who the Darksaber originally belonged to, and so there's like this there's this huge like millennia spanning thread now
of that clan too.
Yeah, I think somehow. I mean,
yeah, like she's a like side member of that clan.
Yeah, it's like House Wren, but the Darksaber is hers or whatever.
Yeah, and then Bo-Katan is also like part of that.
Yeah, because they're like Death Watch like grew out of Vizsla or whatever. Yeah.
There's a lot of deep Star Wars lore being put out there, but you don't necessarily need to know more than what the show gives you. And I deeply love that about the show. It's enjoyable on what it gives you, or you could open up for more. I did want to talk about kind of the concept that this show ended up completing Din's hero's journey. But I'll save that kind of for the mythic, at least the first part. But what's really interesting is like kind of the actions of the armorer, and especially like how he views, his respect to the creed of the Mandalorians, is that now that he is part of a clan with our baby Yoda, they are a family. He is like into its father. Like, this is a life sentence for Din Djarin, right? Yeah,
I think she calls Baby Yoda a foundling. You know?
Like, so, and so the only way to kind of get out of this is to find Baby Yoda's people, the rival clan of sorcerers known as Jedi.
Yeah.
Of which, at this point, there's only the one that we know of, Luke Skywalker.
Yeah.
Or to return it to its people. So like the other Yodas out there.
Yeah. There's sort of that you think that she's going that way with like she's going to say, there's a bunch of baby Yodas out there or something, a bunch of Yoda species. And then it kind of steers toward or the Jedi. And we know sort of in the larger lore of Star Wars that right now, this is the period where Luke Skywalker is basically traveling the galaxy looking for artifacts of the Jedi, right? Like from Battlefront 2, we see him like going into like an Imperial bunker and getting that compass that, you know, leads him to Octo later. And, you know, he's sort of doing his kind of the rebuilding work that very much parallels, you know, what Mando is doing for the tribe, for I guess you might say Clan Vizsla, although I don't know if we quite make that leap yet, but
we don't know.
yeah.
But it's really interesting that there's like, it's like a clan of two, and you know, through this it was the journey itself is the goal. Like he has purpose and he has meaning, you know, through being basically, you know, adopted to Baby Yoda permanently. Like it's a permanent thing for him now. It's not even like a question. He knows what he has to do.
Yeah, there's the knight in Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade that's like tasked with guarding the Holy Grail, right? And so this knight is just there for like thousands of years in this temple, just waiting for somebody to come along and get the Holy Grail. And so I guess Baby Yoda is the Holy Grail in this analogy.
I mean, I think so. Yoda represents, and Baby Yoda represents everything that is mystical about Star Wars.
Yeah.
You know, and Din is now on this like journey to like protect the foundling. Really interesting stuff. Who do you want to tackle first? I just want to spend a quick moment and say, rest in peace, Quill. You were so awesome and basically George Lucas surrogate within the show. I don't know what else to say about Quill. I thought he might live.
Yeah. I was bummed. I mean, it was kind of up in the air, and then we kind of just get confirmation. But no, I mean, I think the George Lucas thing works because he's got Baby Yoda. He's escorting him, you know, the myth, as you would say, and kind of hands it off to IG-11, who, you know, therefore might be Dave Filoni, you know, in this analogy, and then and on the myth gets passed along like a hot potato. But a fantastic character.
And then IG-11, who was reprogrammed, and I loved that he just like straight up says like, I'm a nurse droid.
Yeah.
I'm here to protect.
You know, the show's called Redemption, the episode is, and so it seems to me that the droid is part of that, you know, right? Like I don't think that the droid is like the main character experiencing redemption, but you know, it has kind of that rebirth aspect where, you know, he's been reprogrammed, right? So okay, I was going to get into this in the mythic section, but I think it's appropriate to talk about it now. Everything in this show has to be viewed through the faceless perspective of Din Djarin. He is our protagonist. He is the Mandalorian. So redemption will always be for him. And it is, everything has to be viewed through his lens. So IG-11 is redeemed through his eyes because of the trauma that he experienced when he was a child, you know, being threatened to kill. And they spend a long time showing us that whole sequence of what happened to him as a kid. We've seen flashes of it before, and they spent a long time, like it was like a good, you know, minute and a half or 2 minutes long, like the whole sequence. And the importance is that instead of harming him and taking away his family, IG-11 heals him and brings him back to his new family. That's the redemption. It's, I can trust others. Compassion, even from a droid, is important. Sometimes if you work with others, things will actually end up okay. That's the redemption. It's the rebuilding of faith in society. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And part of how you get to that sort of Campbellian ideal of like, thriving in society.
Yeah, and like the weapon that dealt the wound had to be the one that healed it. We literally had that through IG-11. He didn't trust droids, and now he does.
Yeah, you have to get past like prejudice in general, right? I mean, the sort of, you know, you make assumptions about people, you know, based on much like people do about characters like, Maul or, Ben Solo or, all these characters. Nobody knew that Darth Vader, at one point, Darth Vader, people didn't realize that he was some 9-year-old boy who,
until they tell us more stories, right? Like that's part of it. Yeah.
Which is fun. I mean, just playing with kind of viewpoints and prejudice.
Yeah.
IG-11's, he's good. He's a good character.
Yeah, and I do like your note that he is more human than Gideon because he is beyond the machine. The machine being the bureaucracy of the Empire, beyond the evil of what the Empire represented, the evil of his own programming in some ways too. He now has been transformed and he has purpose.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. IG, he makes that decision, he has freedom that many of the characters in the show don't have. He gets to say, no, I own this. I want to do this. I'm going to blow myself to smithereens to save an innocent, beautiful child, and protect the future. And, Moff Gideon and the troopers under his command, they don't have, any bit of that freedom. They're just part of the,
the forces like even the
Empire.
troops are like, he just kills a bunch of people just to prove his point. Like, like how hopeless is that? How nihilistic is that the Empire just destroys?
Yeah.
And I like that they actually I think it was my husband that texted me. He's like, I love that they call the Imperials imps.
Yeah.
Like to almost give that like devils like feel. Yeah.
Absolutely.
I want to talk about Moff Gideon, and I already talked about like kind of his cadence of speech, but we hear that kind of elsewhere in the show. So it's not necessarily unique to him, but like with his particular monologue, all about how he knows the deepest, darkest secrets of all of the people that are within the building. It's very like the devil. He's very tempting.
Yes.
Like he fills in this spot that was previously filled with Palpatine, right? Like he is the devil of this show.
Yeah.
And that's very important to say because he will kill for killing's sake, but he knows what your deepest fears are, and he will expose them. He will also be very, very smart. And, the evil and the darkness understands you better than you understand yourself. And he proved that with his speech, talking to Kara, talking to Griff, talking to Din. He knows you. Do you even really know yourself?
Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of like the Thrawn thing, like knowing the enemy and extrapolating all this stuff from their history and their culture and their art. But it's done in a very the devil. Yeah, basically.
Yeah, like I have never heard anybody refer in Star Wars to somebody who should have been executed for war crimes. And Kara said that about him.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Like that is crazy. So he must have done some incredibly horrible things. Not that we haven't seen Imperial characters who have done horrible things before. We have. Callus himself participated in the genocide of the Lasan people, and that's a kid's cartoon in Rebels. It's not like we haven't seen horrible people before. Vader himself, Kylo Ren himself, Hux. Like we've seen horrible people before, but this guy feels like a different level. And I don't know why. Maybe it's the monologuing.
Yeah, and there's something sort of elemental and fairy tale like about the fact that, he was executed, he's dead. And Mando Din says, no, that's him, so that gives him kind of this like phantom, monstrous vibe,
well,
even
like,
though
is he untouchable by law in some ways? Like, is he untouchable? Like, you can't kill this guy. And that to me is always like the Palpatine thing. Like you can't kill him. He is unkillable through hate and destruction, and so stays with you and represents the darkness within the characters that, you know, we do cheer for. This is important. So we're going to hang on to that one, especially going into season 2, because we know he's not going away. He is obviously the big bad, at least for now.
Yeah. Yep.
We have Kara, who my good friend Geek Mystic on Twitter actually pointed out, sort of, she did some digging into her name. It was Carasanthia of Dune of Alderaan. So her name is basically translates, if you just take all of the names, is beloved twins born of sand and Alderaan. So she's kind of, or the beloved twin born of sand and Alderaan. She is like paralleled to Leia.
Yeah.
Which is so cool. You know, and so we already have a lot of Vader parallels with our Mandalorian throughout the whole movie. And we even get even more from a symbolic perspective inside of this episode specifically. But you mentioned to me, and I just want to like point it out, like you said, Kara has this great line, like, there he is, Din has been hit, he's not doing well, she dragged him into, you know, out of safety, he did it like to save people, he went out there into danger to try and get rid of the bad guy, and, you know, she drags him into the room, IG-11 comes in, saves the day a little bit, and then they're all stuck in there, and, you know, it's time to get out of there. And it mirrors the Return of the Jedi scene between Luke and Vader and Anakin.
Yeah.
And she says to him,
I won't leave you, which I believe is verbatim a Luke quote from Return of the Jedi. Yep.
It is verbatim.
Yeah.
I won't leave you. You know, let me help you take your mask off. That was even said. Like,
yeah.
Like,
she tries to.
Yeah. There's so much Vader going on / Anakin. I don't even I haven't really processed all of it, but there's a lot there. And instead, you know, she takes the baby, they go into the tunnels to try to find the other Mandalorians to help journey into the underworld.
Yep.
And IG-11, healing the wounds of his past, heals him and allows and takes off his helmet.
And it's interesting in Star Wars that, you know, a lot of the things that sort of happen between the Skywalker children and Vader is through Luke, and Leia doesn't get a lot of those moments. And so you have this kind of like open wound with like the novel bloodline and like this idea that, you know, Carrie Fisher is no longer with us, you know. So we have this kind of lingering, you know, raw nerve of like, you know, Leia is told on Endor, "You're my sister. Your father is Darth Vader." That, you know, that very mean man who tortured you on the Death Star and blew up your, you know, didn't blow up your planet, but he was there. You know, he did a lot of bad things, and then
he held you. You know, Tarkin blew up your planet.
yeah, and then he died like, you know, what, 24 hours later. So Leia didn't really get that sort of like closure and that redemptive moment that Luke got with Vader in like a, you know, in a, you know, technical sense. But so it's like almost as though Kara being from Alderaan is like, you know, we had the weird Tatooine parallels in episode 5 where, you know, the young punk kid Luke got his sort of childhood, you know, adolescence with you know, Vader through the Mandalorian, so to speak, and now we get, you know, kind of a symbolic level, you know, we get Leia.
A Leia
with
you know,
Vader.
I wish you could live situation. Yeah, it's you know, again, I don't have answers to a lot of these things that I see just yet, because it takes me time, and you know, it might just take like the whole run of The Mandalorian. 3 years later, I finally understand what they're trying to say. But these things are important, and they're repeating. We're getting repetitive Vader symbolism, And anytime something happens 3 or more times, it's a motif, and it's something that you need to pay attention to. I do briefly want to talk about the armor before we kind of dig into some of the genre stuff and the mythic stuff. She is the best. I want to do her cosplay now. I love her so much. She just has this like matter of fact way about her. Like he's like, we got to get you out of here. And she's like, no, my job is to do what I have to do. Your job is to take care of the foundling. Go to it. And she's collecting the Beskar. She's melting it all down. She's saving what is important to her and her culture. Like it's just really cool. I love the moment when she basically, signs the adoption papers and Baby Yoda officially becomes his, and he gets his name, Din Djarin, officially this episode, and we get the signet. He earns the Mudhorn clan signet, and it's a clan of 2, and that's all that matters. There's so many significant, emotionally impactful internal symbolism that's happening. And basically shows the completion of Din's journey. We knew from the beginning he wanted a signet. He wanted a full cuirass. He wanted to be a Mandalorian. He wanted to be complete. And his completion is continued journey. That's so interesting.
Yeah.
It's not completion and go home. It's completion and continued journey with child.
Yeah, I keep thinking about how the armor, like she insists on kind of like going down with the ship, she stays behind in this covert and she's kind of like sorting through the armor of the dead and smelting it down. And, you get the sense that it's like her job is kind of, she's kind of just resigned to staying there in the underworld, whereas she's telling him to no, you go on and you
must live.
It makes me think of like Saw Gerrera in Rogue One, that sort of like Save the Rebellion moment where he just sort of takes off his life support and just accepts his fate, or like the whole Ilum becoming Starkiller base, presumably. I mean, we basically like take that for granted now, although like
no, it was in the visual dictionary for Tross.
Oh, has it been in the visual dictionary even? Okay, so I mean, you got like in Fallen Order, we're sort of like experiencing the process of that. Like here's this sacred Jedi site that means so much to the Jedi, and the Empire's coming in and just taking it. And it was the same thing on Jeddah and Rogue One. The Empire comes in and they don't care about myth and ritual, right? Like they they're basically like desecrating like holy ground, and
it's more important for her to complete the sacred acts that she needs to complete than necessarily her own safety, which is so interesting and important. I think that she and we find out she's in no real danger from skinny stormtroopers who haven't eaten or something, because she kicks their butts, right?
Yeah, she does.
With the hammer and the tongs. Oh, I love this woman so much.
Oh, she's great. Yeah.
She like melts the one dude in the forge, like just
brutal.
Anyways, it's so good. Plastisteel has nothing on Beskar, just saying. Yeah. But no, like the acts that she is doing and the ritual that she is doing is vitally important that she continue on. And in the end, she is actually in no danger. It was just the fear for the overwhelming odds, but they are able to, through the course of the journey in the underworld, transform themselves into what they need to be. It's just so good. Yeah.
Joseph Campbell, like his big fear, his big concern is that like we don't have myth anymore and we are losing our rituals, right? And that's like his big thing that he harps on is like, we need a myth, and when Kara's like, let me take your helmet off and save your life, he pulls a blaster on her and he's like, no, you are not taking my helmet off. period.
Yeah.
And that's interesting. That to me feels very Campbell. Like, no, like the way matters, it's cool.
Yeah. And, the way ties to the middle path, the razor's edge, the finding your bliss. This is all the same, conversation. And he is saying to Kara, there are some things that are more important than my life. What I believe in, and that truth is more important than the fact that I could die for it.
Yeah.
You had some great points about genre, which I want to kind of move into.
Sure.
I didn't see this except for the kind of one thing to do with the lava, but did you want to talk a little bit about that connection?
Taika Waititi, he's kind of like everything has layers of, you can watch What We Do in the Shadows and Thor Ragnarok. You can watch those films 100 times and not stop finding things to appreciate and enjoy in them, like new layers of meaning and just wit and imagery and little, sort of pop culture jokes or innuendo, whatever you want to call it. And I don't know, to me, it feels like he's doing a very Terminator 2 thing, with Baby Yoda on the swoop bike or the speeder bike, this sort of like, Arnold and John Connor on the motorcycle taking on like semi trucks and this unstoppable devilish force of the T, what is it? The TX T1000. I think it's the T1000. Yeah. TX is later. And so that, I don't know. I mean, like Baby Yoda is very like sort of E.T. on the bicycle image, from in terms of pop culture iconography. But I mean, John Connor in T2 he's the messiah of the future. He's potentiality. He's our hope for, when the apocalypse comes or whatever, John Connor is going to be the guy who rises up and leads the resistance. And, Baby Yoda is the Jedi, the Force, or whatever, presumably, the Jedi Order that we can't foresee yet because, Rey's still gotta to take those books and do something with them. But I think that's fascinating. And then you get IG-11's whole arc and kind of
like Protector Robot is very Terminator, especially T2. Yeah, Protector
Robot who
was reprogrammed. From a killing, hunting robot previously in Terminator. Yeah, there's all of that in there. And
which Sarah Connor is like very distrustful of him, right? Just like Mando.
Exactly. I also, and the melting scene, as he walks in the lava is very reminiscent of Terminator 2, which is the Terminator I remember the most.
Yeah, it's the best one. Well, I don't know.
I don't know. I've seen maybe 4 of them. How many are there now?
There's 5, I think.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Something like that.
I remember it the most because of how, T1000 was kind of like liquid, right? And that was one of the first times they'd used those effects for that sort of type of action movie with the like liquid metal feel.
I said there's 5. The 6th one was just in the theaters. I haven't seen it yet, but actually there's 6. Correcting myself. Sorry.
Okay, so I'm not caught up in Terminator, but there was definitely that parallel there, which was really cool to see.
Oh yeah.
And like especially with the speeder bikes, like they're like driving through town, and he's really good at shooting, and he's carrying the baby in front, and it's like must protect the baby. And IG-11 is like up there in my favorite droids now.
Yeah.
Like
yeah.
It didn't take much, and now I can do a defragmenting droid on IG-11. It'll be really good. I'm super excited. The other thing I wanted to bring up is that when we get into kind of the Mandalorian lore, we get more and more fantasy feel because we have the Mythosaurus and we have these traditions and rival clans, and it's like a feudal system. Mandalorians, like in the Clone Wars and Not so much in the Clone Wars because they went through a period of democracy, but before the period of peace in Mandalore, and then after in Rebels, we have a feudal system to do with clans and houses that is all based on fealty, and we don't know what happened to that. But when you start to speak about like the past and Mandalore himself, basically the person that made the Mandalorian creed and how people apply to these things and first settled Mandalore, it feels very fantasy like. So like D&D or like a fantasy novel, like even how the Armorer speaks about the Jedi as a rival clan of sorcerers.
Yeah.
Like Mandalorian culture being a creed makes it feel like a different monastical order now than the Jedi. You know, it's almost like they're Templars. They're knights who believe in the way being the middle path of the Force. There's something big happening, and it's coming through in the mythic fantasy nature of the genre pull in story.
Yeah, it makes you wonder if they're sort of like elevating the Mandalorian culture too, in the way that, you know, the sort of the dark Jedi and Vader and the Emperor kind of became like the Sith, and they've sort of built up the Sith, and as like, you know, there were the Jedi, and then, you know, then came the Sith.
Like,
at some
is
point.
there more than just two?
Yeah. I mean, like, just the fact that like this ancient Vizsla guy had like the dark saber and was apparently like both Jedi and Mandalorian of somehow. And
yeah, and you know, it ties to like some of the Knights of the Old Republic history, which is questionable canon, like whether we know some of it is in there, right? Because they just mentioned it, a war with an ancient clan of sorcerers.
Yeah.
So the Mandalorian Jedi war happened at some point in the past, which, you know, is what leads into KOTOR, the Knights of the Old Republic. So we're getting hints of like really far back in the past, at least from the mythology that we're telling nowadays and the lore we're telling nowadays in The Mandalorian.
Yeah. Yeah, Kathleen Kennedy, every time somebody puts a microphone in her face and like says, "So what's next for Star Wars?" Right? She's always like, you know, well, we have so many places that we can go, right? We can go way forward, we can go way back. And, you know, she kind of hinted at the possibility of like sort of KOTOR era stuff. And so
a Mandalorian like Jedi War would be so cool.
Yeah. There's so many seeds being planted, and it's like, whether, you know, what are they going to actually, you know, build on? But I mean, you've got like the whole Malachor and the ancient, you know, Jedi Sith battle that is referenced in like Rebels and stuff, you know, where the crossguard saber
split. Yeah. I don't know. There's lots of cool stuff, but it makes me excited for the new age of Star Wars, because there's so many cool stories to tell with a, you know, I know that this was a long, long time ago, galaxy far, far away. It's supposed to feel like space fantasy, but make it even more medieval and you have me super hooked.
Yes.
You know, more armor, more swords, more space wizards, more rival clans of sorcerers. Yes.
Yeah. I mean, like, with a lot of what you call the Skywalker saga now is like steeped in, you know, World War II, World War I kind of like logic, and the aesthetic of like, you know, World War II naval battles and, you know, dogfighting and, you know, torpedoes and, you know, all this stuff that, you know, cannons, all this kind of 20th century, you know, or Vietnam and Nixon, all that stuff that like George Lucas was really obsessed with, you know, but then you introduce like Campbell and myth into this stuff, and there's like more. Star Wars can be more than it currently is, and it's like we're getting those seeds planted now. It feels like, right, where you know,
like running around in very medieval armor is, to me, like so cool. Like, it'd be like a bunch of people that dress around in like either do like anachronistic like armor, and they, you know, like they're recreationists. Like, that's what it would be like, I think, to see a Mandalorian in person. Like, why is the knight running around the street? It's weird to see, you know, like that's, and they're rare now too. So I don't know, really cool stuff. From a mythic journey perspective, the boon that our hero wanted was a signet, a name, and a purpose, and he got all three.
Yeah.
And his signet is the Mudhorn because of the shared battle that him and Baby Yoda participated in and how they have each other's backs and now they are a family. And his purpose is to protect Baby Yoda until Baby Yoda can go home and, you know, be with his people. His people is actually Din, the Mandalorian. So our hero has his boon of success and he was able to heal Navarro, this land, from basically the imperial infestation, which is Griff refers to things being very difficult since the Imperials arrived. Him being the magistrate, him being kind of in charge of the city. He was able to heal this community, and the thing that he brought to the community was Kara. Was this previously maybe not damaged, but person that had experiences that learned to trust others again.
Yeah, she had kind of, she was sort of just existing, sort of working and just kind of, motivated by money. Like, is this worth my time? And Mando kind of dangled the whole, like, he's an Imperial, that kind of thing, and kind of brought her back into the realm of, like, the cause, right? As opposed to just being a mercenary.
Well, and also like having a specific purpose. Like, yeah, it was really well done. Griffin and Kara seemed overly happy at the end. Yeah. Which is like a little weird for me. But I think that they were happy that the Mandalorian lived and the baby lived, and they had actually done something that they had set out to do.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not like super up on like the Gospels, but there's like this idea that like Baby Yoda has kind of pulled all these different people into his orbit, right? And like, Grief was like a kind of like an earthly fellow who cared about like money and women and like, that sort of like and image.
Now he cares about the community and making sure that the community is good. And Kara cares about staying with the community and building something there. Yeah. Interesting stuff. Not complex by any sense of the imagination, but layered and deep. Give me more of that. Yeah. Yeah. Another kind of Vader parallel, and we've always seen Navarro as like almost a healed version of Mustafar. The lava flow underneath the planet, which is, fundamentally connected to Vader. IG-11 is now part of him because they have experienced this healing situation, and the robotic part of him is burned away in reverse of what happened to Vader, where the human parts of him were burned away. Also, when they join on the riverboat and we get the R2 with legs and arms, which was like the dopest thing I've ever seen from a droid. That was so cool. It is like the river Styx. They are journeying from the underworld back into reality after gaining the boons of the underworld. They are journeying back to the land of the living with their final changes in place, all of their gifts that they have to face kind of the final Dark Father type battle, who's literally like a dragon that Din has to fight with his newly found phoenix, rising phoenix. Like, you've never practiced this since you were a kid, but sure, put it on. And through the sacrifice of IG-11, they are able to emerge from the underworld and gain the gifts that they had earned without training. people don't need training in mythology or fairy tale. They just get the gifts and they get to use them. Ugh.
There's this weird mirror thing happening too, where Mustafar is first in Revenge of the Sith, where Anakin is flying the starfighter, and R2 is sort of like a passenger, right? Like the vulnerable passenger who has to fight off the buzz droids, and it could go horribly wrong at any moment. And in this, the astromech with more
beefy arms,
human, like a more human body, kind of like human appendages, is now the one doing the steering, is the ferryman, the Karen on the river Styx, and the passengers, Cara and Mando, like they are not in control, and they're like, this astromech is going to send us, straight to hell. And so they blow his head off, right? To kind of like keep that from happening. So it's this sort of weird reversal of like, we could be ferried to the land of the dead right now. But we're not going to let that happen because, I don't know. There's this weird sort of meta thing happening maybe where we're getting all these sort of Skywalker saga parallels. And, and I keep thinking about, Kathleen Kennedy and Dave Filoni and the future of Star Wars, right? Are they saying that by going through this underworld, we're breaking free of the Skywalker saga? And I found in Edith Hamilton's mythology, she talks about how one of her last notes on the underworld is that this is the place where dreams ascend to the realm of men. Which I found like, I was like, that, okay, that sets off my kind of, meta alarms in terms of, is that what they're doing? Or I don't know. But,
so one of the things I've been like kind of thinking about a lot is how part of the success of storytelling needs to be that we understand the parameters of the story that we're telling in the new generation, right? So part of the Skywalker saga is that the parameters kept on changing because of its evolution over 42 years.
Yeah.
Who owned what? Who was the master of the mythology? And, that in itself is hard to define. It's very nebulous. You could read absolutely everything and not really understand, what are the parameters of this tale? What are the edges? What are the upper limits? And what are the assumptions going in that we're going to say? This show itself could be setting, like Werner Herzog said, they're creating a new mythology. That was my most terrible Werner Herzog, sorry. But that could be what they're doing is living the understanding of the Star Wars from the George Lucas, Joseph Campbellidian perspective, but setting the parameters for the next generation of storytelling. This is what Star Wars will be during this new era of storytelling. What happens after the Skywalker saga?
Yeah. And like Rebels did the same thing, right? It was like tearing open the whole world between worlds, kind of opening that can of worms. And so, that feels right. I mean, we've got this whole sort of Disney Plus, era opening up and the potential there. And it seems
I feel like it's just trying to reset the ground rules post Skywalker saga.
Yeah. Yeah. Sort of making peace between like the animated world with like the Clone Wars and stuff, and and
many people do consider the animation to be the purest form of Star Wars storytelling because we have 6 movies under George Lucas, and we have 6 seasons of Clone Wars under George Lucas.
Yeah, Pablo had a great tweet that's like long since deleted, but he said like if you want to understand what George Lucas thought of Star Wars, watch the Clone Wars or something like that.
And that's like very apropos to what we're going to be heading into in February when we get season 7. It's a good time now that it's available on Disney Plus to like dig into that and see, what is the mythology that Dave Filoni speaks to, but now understands enough to want to take it and see where it can go. Let's try this baby and take it for a spin, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that we're seeing that handoff in The Mandalorian with Jon Favreau and Dave Filoni helming this. It's exciting to me.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anything else from, a mythic perspective? I'm very happy to see that our Mandalorian at least completed phase 1 of his journey, reaching the boon and getting that.
Yeah.
It's almost like each episode almost follows like a mini hero's journey, because he always ends up in the underworld for a little while.
Yeah.
And then has a resolution and walks away with it with a new piece of information or something that he's learned from it or a friend. I think that given what they might be telling us, I think this is going to be 3 seasons long total. And then that would be a full hero's journey for our Mandalorian. Not necessarily required, but that's what I'm picking up right now. Anything else, Alex?
No, I don't think so. I mean, there's, we got another that sort of tunnel image of, where in the covert, we always saw him sort of heading into these tunnels and going into the unconscious and so forth, or into his subconscious. But, even the lava river that, they're crossing in this one, it's still a tunnel. It's still the same kind of imagery, to where it always ultimately comes back to being a character study of this guy that we, might think we don't know that well, but like in fact, like the whole show is kind of filtered through him.
Mm-hmm. And it's been so wonderful. I can't actually wait to rewatch it. I'm going to rewatch it with my son. He said he wanted to rewatch it from the beginning to watch the end episodes because he's kind of had to wait with like the Rise of Skywalker stuff coming out and everything like that. But my daughter is also really excited. It's a show for my whole family, and I can't thank Star Wars enough for that. Yeah,
I mean, like people that never really talked to me about Star Wars before, are asking me, hey, do you want to go see, episode 9 or what have you, or just talking about Star Wars in general because, they heard about Disney Plus and Baby Yoda and they jumped on board and checked out this show and they love it. And it's, I think there's something always to be said for a story that, it teaches you about the universe, but you don't have to be like a scholar of 42 years worth of Star Wars lore to get into it and like love it. I think more so than anything else, you get kind of like that bang for buck that, it's important. It's like vital, but yet, you don't have to be kind of a hardcore, fan of many years to really see what they're telling you.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And I want to thank all the listeners who have come along on the journey for this Once Upon a Time in the Outer Rim, our recap and deep dive show for The Mandalorian. We've had so much amazing feedback from everyone who's been listening. And Alex, you for coming along on this ride and committing to these 8 episodes with me has been so great. And I love that I've gotten to speak with you weekly about life and then record a fun show on The Mandalorian.
Oh yeah, it's been so much fun. I would. I just getting to kind of hang out and talk about Star Wars, but also kind of explore a story in depth on a weekly basis has been a pretty sweet gift for sure.
So, Alex, as this is our last episode, where can people find you? And I know you'll be back at some point on the show, but thank you again for doing this with me.
Oh, yeah, thank you so much.
It was a big commitment, but thank you. And then, where can people find you?
On Twitter, mostly at Alex J. Kane, Kane.
And, thank you for doing this. And I guess, to quote episode 9, perhaps we should have a libation at the conclusion of our shared narrative. Cheers. Thank you for listening to What the Force. I'm Marie-Claire Gould, your host. Our music is orchestral music composed by Christy Carew for What the Force. We have a Patreon at patreon.com/whattheforce. We'd like to thank all our patrons, especially those who love and are obsessed with What the Force. Melody, Night Huntress, In Wild Space, Susan, Jessica, Brad, Black-Eyed Lily, Anna Perez, Jawa Dog, Macau Mom, Neil, and James. Make sure you like and subscribe on your podcast app of choice or on YouTube. Leaving a 5-star review on iTunes helps other people find the show. You can connect with us on Twitter at What the Force Show, What the Force Podcast on Facebook, or on our website, whattheforce.ca. We also have a new Discord. Links are available in the liner notes. Feel free to reach out and start a conversation. Cheers.